And that alien's been eating alone for 47. Someone should do something. Should do something, not my problem. Dara Osi repaired communication arrays for a living, which meant her days had a shape to them. Show up early, run diagnostics, fix what was broken, file the report, go home. And Voss Station was not the kind of place that rewarded people for paying attention to things outside their job description. It was a transit hub, busy and indifferent, the kind of place where thousands of people moved through every cycle without leaving any impression on each other at all. Dara had learned, in 4 years of working there, that the simplest way to survive a long shift was to keep her eyes on whatever was broken in front of her. She noticed the alien on a Wednesday, not because she was looking, but because the cafeteria was crowded that day, and the only open seat was 2 tables away from where he sat, and once she sat down it was hard to look anywhere else. He was Veshan. She knew enough about station demographics to recognize the species' tall, pale blue skin, 4-fingered hands, and eyes that were a deep, solid black with no visible iris. The Veshan were common enough on Voss Station that seeing one wasn't unusual. Seeing one sit completely alone for an entire meal cycle, tray untouched, and staring at the middle distance with the stillness of someone who had stopped expecting anything to change that was different. She finished her lunch and went back to work. If you're new here, welcome to HFY Universe, where sometimes the most human thing in the galaxy isn't a fight. Hit subscribe right now because this one is going to stay with you. Let's go back to Wednesday. She spotted him again on Thursday. Same table, same untouched tray, same stillness. On Friday she asked one of the cafeteria staff, a Keth woman named Breva who had worked the lunch counter for longer than most people could remember, how long the Veshan had been coming in. Breva glanced over at his table. Since the start of the cycle, she said. 47 days. Does he ever eat? Sometimes. Not much. Breva shrugged in the particular way of someone who has filed something under not their problem. Orders the same thing every day. Sits, leaves. Never says a word to anyone. Dara nodded and carried her tray to her usual seat. She turned it over in her head for the rest of her shift. The low-level way problems sit with you when you haven't decided what to do about them yet. Voss Station processed an enormous number of transient residents every cycle. People arrived, moved through, disappeared. Some of them were lonely. That was, technically, not her department, and she packed an extra portion the next morning anyway, not as a plan, just in case. His name was Saul. She learned this on the first day she sat across from him, which was a Saturday, and chosen because Saturdays were slower and there was less chance of anyone from her team seeing her do something she couldn't quickly explain. She put her tray down without asking permission, because asking felt like it would turn the moment into something formal and strange. Protein portions are better on Saturdays, she said, pushing the extra container across. Whoever comes in on weekends actually measures properly. I always end up with more than I can finish. Saul looked at the container, then at her. His black eyes were very still. I have not been approached before, he said. His translator rendered the words in careful, formal coalition standard phrasing that had the texture of a language learned precisely rather than grown up in. I noticed, Dara said. Figured someone ought to do something about it. He didn't reach for the food immediately. He studied it for a moment, then picked it up and ate in small, unhurried bites that told her he was considerably hungrier than he'd been letting on. Dara ate her own lunch and left it at that. They didn't say much that first day. She asked what he worked on. Environmental systems, and he said calibration and maintenance, long hours alone in narrow utility corridors. She mentioned communication arrays, her own share of tight spaces and quiet work. He seemed to find this mildly interesting in the specific way of someone not accustomed to being asked questions at all. And over the days that followed, she pieced together his situation the way you piece things together when you share a table with someone regularly, not all at once, but steadily. He'd been transferred to Voss Station 8 months earlier from a research post in the Outer Reach, and the transfer had not been his idea. The work itself was fine, but the station ran louder than anything he'd been used to, and the Veshan community here was small, and he hadn't managed to find his footing in it yet. And he described all of this with a measured evenness she recognized as the vocabulary people use for loneliness when they'd rather not name it directly. And she also learned he disliked the nutrient paste the cafeteria defaulted to for Veshan dietary requirements, apparently formulated for a regional variant of the species he didn't belong to, and tasting, as he put it with great exactness, incorrect. And she started bringing something from the human menu instead. He ate it without comment the first time. On the second he said simply, "This is better," which she suspected was more meaningful than it sounded, and handled it accordingly. A routine formed the way routines do when no one officially agrees to one. Monday through Friday, same table, same hour, 2 trays, conversation that had started in short exchanges and slowly expanded into something that took up the full lunch period without either of them planning for it. And one afternoon midway through their 4th week, the cafeteria's ventilation made a sound like something had come loose deep inside the wall. Saul tilted his head, listened for 3 seconds, and said without looking up from his tray, "Secondary coupling on the return duct. 3rd panel from the east wall." And Dara stared at him. "Environmental systems," he said. "You can identify a fault just from the sound. In most cases. The acoustics in this room are fairly informative once you learn the baseline. How long has it been making that noise? 11 days. I submitted a maintenance request on day 3, and it has not moved forward. She filed a secondary request through the communications division that afternoon, a different administrative channel with a faster turnaround. The coupling was repaired by the following morning. Saul acknowledged this the next day with a brief nod, in which she had come to understand was his version of genuine warmth. She told him around that same time about her own transfer to Voss Station 3 years earlier, also not requested, also an adjustment she hadn't fully accounted for. About how the first year had been harder than she'd told anyone. About how the station had gradually become somewhere instead of just a place she was, though she couldn't name the exact moment it shifted. He absorbed this carefully. It became somewhere, he said. A beat passed. I think I understand that differently now than I did a few months ago. And he said Dara slid the last of her portion across the table. He took it, and the brief hesitation he'd had at the very beginning was gone entirely. There was a Tuesday in the second month when she arrived to find him already seated, an expression closed in the particular way that meant something had happened before she got there. She sat down, poured the station coffee substitute into both cups as she always did, and passed one over. He wrapped both hands around it, 4 fingers, pale blue, very still. The plant died, he said, and after a moment, she didn't offer an apology because it felt too small. She didn't minimize it either, because she understood without needing it, explained that this wasn't really about the plant. How long did you have it? She asked. 6 years. It came from my previous post. Before that, the academy. A pause. I'm aware it's disproportionate to be affected by it. It's not disproportionate, Dara said. It was the one thing that traveled everywhere with you. That means something. They ate without filling the quiet with anything extra. And 3 days later she set a small cutting from her own windowsill succulent on the table beside his tray, repotted into a spare calibration container that was approximately the right shape for the purpose. Requires almost nothing, she said. I've kept mine alive for 2 years, which is honestly the achievement I'm most proud of professionally. Saul looked at it. I am familiar with your maintenance record, he said, which was as close as he got to an open smile. He took the cutting. 6 weeks later, and dropping it into conversation the way he dropped most things in without setup, he mentioned it had taken root. She nodded and finished her lunch. Her shift supervisor noted in a quarterly review that her diagnostic completion rate had improved by 11% over the previous 3 months. And she couldn't have drawn a straight line between that and anything specific. But there was something about an afternoon with a fixed point in it that made the morning easier to move through, and she had stopped questioning it. She mentioned this to Saul one Thursday, offhand. He considered it, and I've noticed something similar, he said. The station feels less random. I know where I'm going at midday. Dara thought that was one of the most accurate descriptions of what a lunch table could do for a person that she'd ever heard, and Saul made the small expression she'd learned to recognize as satisfaction that he didn't intend to elaborate on. 6 months after the first Saturday, she arrived at the cafeteria to find him already there. 2 trays on his side of the table instead of 1. She sat down, and you prefer the grain bowl on Thursdays, he said, and they run out by midday if you don't collect early. She looked at the grain bowl, then at him. Something settled quietly in her chest that she didn't have an immediate word for. Thank you, she said. It's practical, Saul said, and you're easier to talk to when you've eaten. Is that your way of saying you enjoy my company? He met her eyes steadily. I did not say that, he said, and then let exactly the right amount of silence pass before adding, I implied it. And Dara laughed, the genuine kind that doesn't need anyone watching, and Saul took it in with the quiet focus of someone filing something away carefully. Years later, when people on Voss Station asked how the two of them had ended up the way they had, and the answers were always slightly different depending on who was telling it. Dara's version began on a Wednesday, with a crowded cafeteria and a Veshan who looked like he'd stopped counting on things to change. Saul's version began on a Saturday, and with an extra protein portion and a human who sat down without preamble and claimed the weekend portions were measured differently, something he had later checked and found to be entirely false and never brought up because it had clearly never been the point. Both versions arrived at the same ending, and the cafeteria on Voss Station still had the same corner tables, the same ventilation, the same nutrient paste nobody with options ever actually ordered. The table near the window, the one where the docking bay light came through in the late afternoon and turned everything briefly, gold was taken by midday most days, 2 trays. Same hour. No one sitting alone. The 47 days were a long time ago. That's the story for today. And drop a comment and tell me, what do you think went through Dara's head that Saturday morning when she picked up the extra portion? I think about that moment a lot, and I want to know what you think she told herself. If this one stayed with you, share it with someone who needs it today. And 2 seconds of your time means everything to a channel like this one. And if you haven't subscribed to HFY Universe yet, do it now. New stories every week, and the next one is already coming. Until then, stay human. Even when it's just a meal, especially when it's just a meal.